As we celebrate Memorial Day, we're honoring the life and legacy of Vaughn Kimball in a special edition of Locked On Cougars.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and thank you to all of you we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU, and this is a special edition of said Locked On Cougars podcast, as it is Memorial Day. So a number of you are going to be out and about celebrating the holiday. The vast majority, I would imagine, are going to have the day off from work, as it usually is the unofficial kickoff to summer. But we cannot forget to honor those who have gone on before us, and that's what I'm going to do on today's show. This is not going to be your typical podcast, but I've done this annually for the last 3 or 4 years, talking about the life and legacy of Vaughn Kimball. Now, Vaughn Kimball is famous for a very awesome telegram he sent to BYU in 1942 to the football program, the famed "Give 'em hell, Brigham" telegram that we'll get to here in a moment. But more importantly, I feel like in this story is we need to talk about who Vaughn Kimball was and why he is such an illustrious figure in BYU sports even to this day. This is a man that enrolled or signed up for the United States Navy the day after Pearl Harbor in 1941. He was a member of the BYU football squad in 1941 and was in place, in most people's eyes, to be BYU starting quarterback in 1942. Well, when you decide to enlist in the armed forces, that is obviously going to stop you from potentially being that starting quarterback. But he passed up on the opportunity, like many men his age, millions of them around the country. I've got both of my grandfathers. One was a pilot in World War II. The other was a reservist during the Korean conflict. And both of them are heroes to me. And Vaughn Kimball, you can add him to that list. In fact, our good friend BYU Stats Man sent me a link not too long ago that in World War II alone, 52 members of the BYU football program served around the globe in the armed forces in that global conflict. It just shows you that this generation we're talking about, the quote-unquote greatest generation, is truthfully a special bunch. So I don't want to take a lot of time today and bloviate on about other things that we can get to on tomorrow that are a little more trivial in nature if you think about it. But the life and legacy of Vaughn Kimball is awesome, because this is a man that, like I said, enlisted in the United States Navy the day after Pearl Harbor, ended up being a recruiter around the country for a number of years, but ended up serving finally on the U.S.S. Bunker Hill. Now, the U.S.S. Bunker Hill was in Okinawa, one of the more fierce battles in the Pacific theater of the war. And then in 1945, it was attacked by simultaneous kamikaze bombings that caused the ship essentially to just explode. More than 400 members of the crew were lost, and 41 of them were presumed lost at sea, and Vaughn Kimball was one of them. His remains have never been recovered to this day, but this is a man that stood for everything that was good about BYU sports and BYU football. You might recall he was the younger brother of then BYU head coach Eddie Kimball, who also enlisted in the armed forces, gave up his head coaching position to go and participate in World War II before returning to BYU. And the crazy thing is, 1942 marked the very first time in BYU's official intercollegiate history. Now, they had some wins over Utah in the 1890s when they were BYA, Brigham Young Academy. But 1942 marked the first time when BYU officially began football again since 1922, 20 years before BYU got a victory over their arch rival. And that brings us to, I'm going to throw this up here, the Western Union Telegram that is famous. It says this: Saturday. So this comes from Vaughn Kimball. It goes to Floyd Millett, who was filling in as BYU's head coach with Eddie Kimball, Lieutenant Commander Eddie Kimball, serving in the armed forces. But he sent this, quote, Saturday, there's one thing more important than the war, and that is to beat Utah. This accomplishment would aid the morale of 25,000 alumni and aid the war effort, so give them hell, Brigham. Give them hell. Obviously, that inspired the BYU football program to go out and get the win over their arch rival, 12-7 that day. There are still pieces of the goalposts from that game that are floating around in this community. I've seen pieces of them at BYU in the student athlete building, their little museum they've got there. There are pieces of the goalposts that they cut down to like little square blocks and gave them away to people to commemorate the breakthrough for the BYU football program. I'm not going to say that Vaughn Kimball's telegram pushed BYU over the top against their arch rivals, but it sure didn't hurt, because this is a young man like many his age. Like I said, 51 others of his teammates end up serving in World War II. We have, I'm sure, if you were to go back through BYU history, I'm not saying just BYU sports history, and BYU history, I would imagine that you could probably put down BYU students, alumni, professors, administrators, whoever you want it to be, that have served in every armed conflict the United States has participated in. I would imagine beginning with the Spanish-American War in the late 1890s, World War I, World War II, the Korean conflict, Vietnam, on through the modern day and the war on terror. There are BYU fingerprints across the United States military, and it's humbling, honestly. I'm lucky enough to have had two grandfathers, like I said, that were both in the armed forces, that they, along with millions of other people, have laid down their lives and have gone out and protected the freedoms we're afforded in this great country, the United States of America, that allow guys like me to sit down and crack a mic and talk for a half hour every night about BYU sports and put it out there for the world to enjoy. That is just incredible to me. I've had a pretty blessed life, and a lot of it is due to the fact of people like Vaughn Kimball, my grandfather, James Keith Millville, my other grandfather, Herman Kent Hatch, who have gone out and have served their country and have done things that, frankly, I will probably, well, hopefully will never have to do. That's the incredible part about this. So I don't mean to get sappy. I don't mean to get over the top about this, but we cannot forget on this day, this Memorial Day, to honor those who have gone on before us. And I'm a softie. You guys know this. Any of you who've watched this podcast for a long time, I am very prone to breaking down and breaking into tears, seeming at the drop of a hat if something touches me. And this is a topic that it really does. It just brings some tender feelings. So I just want to say thank you to all. And if you are out there, I know a number of you that are watching this podcast, our good friend Mojo, who's a pilot in the United States Air Force, a number of others of you who have told me that you are in the armed forces and watch and enjoy this podcast. It allows you to keep up with BYU. Whether you have served, you are serving, or you plan to serve in the military, no matter where and when and whatever it might be, thank you. Let me just put that right there. Thank you for your service. We owe you a debt of gratitude that honestly can never fully be repaid. And guys like Vaughn Kimball will forever, ever be etched in the lore of BYU football, because yes, it's an incredible quote. Give them hell, Brigham. Give them hell. That obviously stands out across a century's worth of BYU football going into their 100th season this fall. That one stands out among a number of other great moments, great topics, great quotes that have existed in BYU football and BYU athletics history. But on Memorial Day, we want to pay tribute to the life and legacy of Vaughn Kimball, as well as many, many others who have gone out and served our country and will continue to do that in coming years and days and weeks and on into the future. So thank you to all of you who have served, are serving, or will serve. And thank you once again to the life and legacy of Vaughn Kimball, because it inspires me to this day. So enjoy your Memorial Day. We'll be back tomorrow with another full edition of the podcast, breaking down all the news out there in BYU sports, plenty of BYU football, BYU basketball, and everything else that we haven't covered of the weekend that was. We'll get back to that on tomorrow, but enjoy your holiday, and wishing you a very happy Memorial Day, and a big thank you for joining us right here on Locked On Cougars.